Hey man, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you
I,
hear me?
I can.
Hey, John.
It's good to see you.
Yeah, it's nice to see you too. It's been a while.
It's been a while. I'm going to turn up my volume a little bit better so I can hear you better.
Okay, I'm just glad we're both wearing our hats.
It's Sunday after all.
You can't wear it. Yeah, this is Hat Sunday. Man, if you can't wear a hat on Sunday, drink coffee.
And Diet Pepsi. I've already had my coffee, but I'm continuing the caffeine buzz with some Diet Pepsi. Do you still drink those diet ginger ale things?
I haven't actually for the last week in an attempt to eat and drink better.
Yeah, sure.
But because I went to see my doctor for a checkup, and they always tell me the same thing, which is, well, you're fine, but you should probably lose some weight, which is
Okay.
old news. You don't really see a lot of elderly 250-pound people, so it's probably in my best interest. So yeah, I've switched to these other drinks that my partner introduced to me, sugar-free water-based drinks.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah. Sure. I've been trying to get off. I quit drinking. It'll be a year ago, October. I quit smoking finally in 2000, early 2015. But Diet Pepsis are tough, and I'm still trying to quit chewing nicotine gum. I've been chewing it for 5 years. Time to stop, man. It's too expensive, and it's just time for me to let it go. But I gave up the booze and the actual cigarettes, so I figure that's at least something, you know.
Yeah, totally.
It's tricky
Uh,
though.
yeah, it's hard.
You
I've
used to
switched.
smoke cigarettes, right?
I used to. Now I do this.
Okay. It's hard, man. That's a tough addiction. It was really hard for me to let that go.
Yeah,
And I still, when I see people doing it on TV and stuff, I still go, wow, that looks like fun, you know. But
sure, sure. Well, well, thanks for agreeing to talk to me, John.
my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Um, I guess on your suggestion, I downloaded the Not Tonight, you know, record, and I've been listening to it. We've been listening to it a whole lot, like a whole lot, and it's moved into the slot of when I watch my daughter and just want to have music on in the background that's not going to upset her. She seems to like it, so I've basically put Not Tonight on uh, repeat like 5 or 6 times in a row for the days I have her and just are running around with her. Just some nice low key music.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
well,
that
that
was
makes
yeah. So that was it. So thanks for that. I think I'm just gonna try to start this little conversation and just see how it goes because I do
okay.
have some questions. I even wrote down some stuff. So first off, um, this book of mine coming out. It's just coming out during this weird age, this whole pandemic thing. How have you been this year? As far as I don't know if you had stuff planned when this all went down, but I'm just kind of wondering how you've been doing and like how you've been getting by and what your schedule's like. I know that you're like a single parent. Um,
Yeah.
And do you actually have like a job, like a day job? How does everything? How do you balance everything? And what has life been like since all this crazy stuff has started?
I'm pretty fortunate. I haven't been relying on music for a living in a while. The last real touring band I was in, I was playing drums for Sarah Shook and the Disarmers, and I left that in 2017. Um, excuse me, for a lot of reasons, and one of them was that I wasn't seeing my son as much as I wanted to, you know. And you know how that is when you're a single parent. You know, you're already seeing the child not that much. So when you start going on the road and it cuts into it and scheduling, it became kind of a nightmare for me. And then right around early 2018, I got full-time sole custody, not because I was pushing for that or because my son necessarily was. It just sort of happened that way. So I have him, all the time, which is mostly great.
Sure.
There are definitely times, I'm sure, where he, would like to have a little space from his father. But the good thing is that I know at all times, and again, you know how this is, like I know that he's got food. I know that he's, safe. I know exactly where he is. And I get to spend a lot of time with him, obviously. So that, we were already kind of used to being around each other a lot. I have a job, and I got salaried right before this whole thing went down. So I'm not starving, and my partner is a professor at Elon. So between the two of us, I mean, we're certainly not what I would call wealthy, but nobody's gonna starve.
Right.
And it makes me feel pretty fortunate, honestly. I've in my brain kind of been like, gee, I miss being on the road. I miss playing music a lot, but I feel pretty lucky that that's not what I was doing for a living when this all went down, because I don't know what I see my friends, struggling in a very real way, who were doing that. So we're okay. My son misses his friends a lot. I mean, he has not been able to see any of them since this happened. We've kind of tried to set some things up, but nobody really is comfortable doing it, and I don't blame them. I'm not really comfortable doing it. So I've been playing a lot of basketball with him. My 3-point shot has improved a lot.
Right.
Going for a lot of walks, watching a lot of movies. We've been watching the Arrow TV series from the beginning, the Green Arrow adaptation, and just kind of the same stuff I'm assuming everyone else is doing. Musically, I was in the middle of a record with my band. I did Not Tonight, which is like a solo record, and went back to making a record with my band. We were in the middle of that when this pandemic hit, so the studio shut down. That's it. I don't know when it will be reopening. So what we decided to do, we would be having a record, come out right now. So what I decided to do was try recording remotely. Everybody records from their own house. We did this Kinks cover that we've been playing live for a couple years. So I knew everyone knew their parts, and I thought, we'll just try this, see how it goes. And if it goes well, maybe we can start making a new record this way. So I was happy with the way it came out. So now that motivated me to write a bunch of new songs, which I was not writing much at that point. And the recording came out so well, it kind of started this fire in me. I started writing more, and now I've gone in and, just kind of laid down a grid, some acoustic guitar, and vocals over click tracks, and they're adding their parts. And so hopefully we'll have something out relatively soon. I wanted it to come out in the fall, but I don't want to compete with, the most insane election that has ever occurred in the history of the United States. So, you know what I mean? So obviously, hopefully next year early, there'll be at least an EP from us.
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at,
Cool. Have you ever, like in your past, especially, well, I was going to say, because I know you played drums for a lot of people in between doing your own thing. And in your musical career, was there ever a time where you were like in a position to live off of playing music? Was that something, and was that something you actually wanted to do?
It's probably not something I wanted to do. There have been times when I was in a band called June in the mid-90s, maybe for about a year. They were signed to Beggar's Banquet. And so we were put on the road, and we were given, you know, per diems and a budget and all that stuff. So I was making a living doing it with them. It wasn't a great living, but I was 25, you know, I just wanted to pay my rent and buy records and clothes, you know.
Sure.
The Pistols, $2 Pistols came kind of close. But to be perfectly honest with you, you know, it's a struggle for me because I really don't like the music industry as such.
What? No way. You don't like the music industry? Oh, my
I mean, you know, and when I was in Sarah Shook and the Disarmers, and that's what they wanted, you know, they wanted all of those bells and whistles, which I don't blame people for wanting that. They signed to Bloodshot Records, and we went out and started doing all those things that you do when you're a music industry band, when you're on a label and you are on a release schedule.
yeah.
And I fucking hated it. You know, I just immediately, like, doing South by Southwest and all the record industry things and all of the photo ops and the handshakes while the person's looking over your shoulder for someone more important. I hated it. So it was already kind of driving me crazy again. So for me, man, you know, like, I know that there are people with a lot of integrity who are in that world. There are bands who operate in it and do it for a living and do it and manage to have integrity. Sure, and you and I could name those bands if we wanted to, but it's just not something that I like to deal with. It you know, it's just not. I don't know. I've never been able to stand it, you know. And
it's like putting yourself in this position that's not really very comfortable, or trying to wear a suit that's not like the Johnny Bravo Brady Bunch suit or whatever.
That's it.
My obscure childhood reference.
So, I mean,
they just tried to Johnny Bravo everybody at some point.
Exactly.
You didn't like the suit. If I was an A&R scout, I just wouldn't be able to pick them. As far as like somebody that I heard that I thought, well, this is really good and this deserves more people to hear it. And that's my defense for hearing something I like a lot. That, you know, especially, you know, every once in a while I agree with the masses,
right?
Queen, the Beatles, whatever, you know, like.
Yeah.
But
me too.
Yeah, and a lot of people that I like are, you know, sort of in this weird netherworld, and a lot of them don't want to play the game either.
I'm with you. I mean, I know that you love Scott Walker, and I do.
Love Scott Walker.
And I think that's a really good example of someone who just was not motivated at all by the kinds of things you kind of have to be motivated by if you're going to make it, you know, in the music industry. You know, I mean, he obviously had his phase with the Walker Brothers, which I love that music. Like, I
love a lot of the Walker Brothers stuff. It's great.
But really that was like the period where he was the star, and then, you know, he was like, you know, no, I love this Jacques Brel stuff, and I love, you know, Sibelius, and I love all this stuff, and I don't want to be involved in this world. And, you know, there's a price that comes with that. Obviously, it's the one you're talking about. Like, when we put out this last Kink single, we decided to do a video for it. Our pedal steel player works for Yep Rock. He's a graphic designer there, and he said, I've made some videos. I made a video for Chuck Prophet. I've done a couple videos with some animation. Why don't we do that? And so we filmed each other. When we filmed ourselves, my son filmed me on the back porch, you know, miming along with this song. It was kind of fun. But I sent that thing, you know, I thought, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. I like it. It's a good cover. It's a good recording, you know, and it got, and I'm not saying this in in a bitter way at all. Not one local outlet wrote anything about it. Not one single. I mean,
you mean like people around here,
right?
Like, well, there's not much. I mean, I haven't really followed. There's not really much left, right? There's. Like,
I guess there's the Independent, and there's a couple other, like, you know, triangle music, whatever kind of local things. And I, you know, I sent it to and I'm not, like I say, I'm not bitter. I'm not angry about this, but I was like, wow, like nobody's going to cover this thing. Okay. Like this is where we're at. And I think part of that is me just being older. I mean, I'm 51 and I've been around forever, and I'm not necessarily exciting. And my audience, I'm sure at this point, is older people. You know.
But you're also being older. You also have responsibilities and stuff to, like, you know, for being a parent, and also, you know, you want to keep doing what you're doing, but you're not as much a slave to the idea that this has to happen.
Right.
You know, these people got to do this kind of thing. You know, you're obviously in it for life, but you know, your priorities just kind of change, and then at some point you're going to be like older and less exciting to whoever's in charge of being a tastemaker. And it doesn't seem like there's a lot of tastemakers now. Like the internet's just leveled that field or whatever. You know, it's been years since anybody, you know, any local press has talked about me for various reasons or whatever. You know, that's just the way it goes. You know? And it seems like the weekly, we had 2 weeklies, right, for a long time. I keep getting them confused. Which one's still around? Oh, the Independent's still around.
Yep.
Spectator's long gone.
Yeah.
And it seems like now I almost never look at the weekly.
Right.
You know, like there was a point in my life, and this is kind of sad, like in my 20s, where like the highlight of my week was waiting to see. This is embarrassing, actually. Was waiting to see, like, oh, the weekly's coming out, and that's really fucking sad.
We've all been there, man. We've all been there. Are they
going to talk about something that I deem necessary?
Yeah.
And now it's like the weekly, nothing exists anymore except for food recipes and talking about some injustice somewhere that everybody needs to know about. Nothing else seems to exist.
No, it's true.
That's where we're at, you know.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm not trying to make this about myself. We're going to go back to you in a second.
Oh, it's okay. Yeah, go.
But I mean, like, I don't know if you're in this position because you've played shows and stuff and you put out records for years. But now it's like, I don't even know what it would, you know, I feel firmly outside of all that stuff, even though I love music as much as I ever have.
Sure. Me too.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just kind of a weird position to be in. But anyway, I don't know what well, there's huge gaps in my knowledge of you. You know, like I think the last time I saw you is when you and I think Danny came over and we watched that Gene Clark movie.
You and me and Daniel got together. Yeah, we watched the Gene Clark, and I think we talked over most of it. But that was such an enjoyable evening. That was so much fun. I was kind of going through some weird stuff. It was just nice to go somewhere and not, you know, just talk about music and old times and stuff. I don't know. That was a really fun night. Yeah.
But I mean, like, what I know about you from when I first met you was I met you in Raleigh. You were known as, well, you were a drummer.
Yep.
You know, and I think you were in Light in August.
Yeah. Because you wrote about us for Maximum Rock and Roll. That would have been 86, I think. 85, 86, somewhere.
That's right. I wrote a Maximum Rock and Roll scene report with all these bands that had nothing to do with Maximum Rock. Light in August is a really good band. Of course, it's not. It doesn't sound like MDC, but you kids might like them. Here's another band that nobody that reads Maximum Rock and Roll is gonna probably like.
Yeah.
But I'm going to talk about it because I like whatever I like, and that's it. But yeah, so you were in Light in August, and then Finger came next, I believe.
Yeah, I went to England. Light in August went through all these weird phases. Thomas ended up in the band, Thomas Phillips.
Yeah.
I brought him in because our bass player, he was like my best friend at that time, and our bass player quit, so I brought him in. But then the band broke up, and I left town. I went to Europe. I was working at the Department of Revenue downtown. I saved up some money, and I just took off, man. And I went to England and played in a I guess it would be a punk band there called Sync.
Yeah, I remember there was like a 7-inch, and that guy Ed Wen.
Yep, that's him. Yeah,
the guy that every once in a while he leaves a nice comment on whatever social crap I have, whatever. But you played with Ed, and he was in that band, The Stupids.
I was in the Stupids, yep. And so I did a full European tour with them. We were opening up for a band called the Instigators, who were like a British punk band.
I remember them.
And then I came back, and Ricky and I had been playing together right before I left, Ricky Hicks, who you obviously know. And
Ricky Hicks from No Labels?
One and the same, Dr. Hicks.
Dr. Hicks.
And so when I came back, Ricky and I moved in together with Bo Taylor, and the three of us lived there. And then Ricky and I started playing with John Singletary, and then we got Brad Rice, and then I did Finger for, I think, 89, 90, 91, 92. It was a little while, I think. And then I quit. Yeah. I left in 92. They kept going for a while, but I wanted to move to Chapel Hill. I was dating someone in Chapel Hill, Andy Hervey, who I'm sure you remember. He was probably my best friend, and he had moved to Chapel Hill. So
yeah, I played in a little joke band with Andy Hervey.
Okay.
He lived with Ian Shannon, and we were all friends with, and Ethan Smith and people like that.
Sure, right. So when he moved over there, I followed him, and I moved in with him, and that was kind of my leaving Raleigh moment, and I've never gone back. But after that, I played drums for Chris Stamey for a little while, and just kind of played in all these Chapel Hill bands. And then when I was 25, I got this call from this band June that I'd never seen, and they said, we're being approached by all these labels, and we love our drummer's leaving. And so I went and joined them, and it was not music that I had ever really played before. It had weird time signatures and very hard to describe kind of music, but they got signed. And during that is when I started forming $2 Pistols. And after that, it was just, there I go. I'm going to do this other thing. And,
right.
And I don't know how you feel about it. Like I love playing drums. It's hard. Like I can sit in my house here and play acoustic guitar, or I can go off in a corner and nobody's really bothered. Setting up the kit, that's a different story. It's a different deal. So I love it when somebody calls and says, would you come play on this session? Matt Smith, who used to be in Subculture, that guy, just hit me up last year and asked me to play on some stuff he was doing, and I went and did that, and it was a blast. But I don't sit around playing drums anymore. That just doesn't happen.
I haven't played drums since. Well, I played a little bit this year because I'm recording with Mike Dean.
I saw that. That's awesome.
Yeah. It's. I think it's going to be really good and fun. So it's. Sure. I missed it. So it's. But I wouldn't say that I'm not like a practicing drummer, and it took a little while to get back into it, but it's like riding a bike or whatever. It's
totally like that. When I was in the Disarmers, when I started playing for them, I hadn't been playing much at all, and after like 6 months, I was like, oh wow, I could do all this fun stuff again.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. But before you actually formed the $2 Pistols, how long were you just working out songwriting and I mean, did you always play guitar?
No. I at some point when my early 20s, when I moved to Chapel Hill, I went to see my dad, and I was listening to a lot of. I'd gotten into Graham Parsons and all that through probably the Finger guys. But when I went to England, I was listening to a lot of that stuff, along with the same stuff I always listen to, like The Sweet and Mark Bolan and all that stuff that I loved and still do. And sometime in my early 20s, I went to see my dad, and he had this nylon string guitar, and it was just lying out, and I knew he wasn't really using it, so I borrowed it, and I bought some songbooks that had guitar chords in them. I've got a Merle Haggard one and an Ernest Tubb one, and from a used bookstore downtown in Chapel Hill, I got one that was really old of Alice Cooper. and it had stuff from like Love It to Death and Billion Dollar Baby. So that it was, so I learned how to play, like I'm 18 and Ballad of Dwight Fry and shit like that.
I love those records.
Me too, yeah. Um, so then I just started writing songs, and I had written some in finger, but I didn't play guitar, so I was always kind of humming, trying, and that kind of works, but it's not as easy as being able to go play this chord.
Sure, that's what Jello Biafra does. That's what he did, because he was the main writer. He didn't play an instrument, so what he would do is he would like hum his musical ideas to the guys that could play, and that was how they.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. I think John Lydon too, because apparently Chrissie Hynde was teaching him how to play guitar when he got attacked by those royalists and one of them stabbed him through one of his hands, and it severed the nerve tendons. Maybe it was his chording hand, so he can't play chords or something. So he did a lot of humming as well. But
right.
But yeah, so then it just kind of took off, and ever since then I just been writing songs. And the thing is, like, the thing about writing songs is that you can make money from that you don't make necessarily from playing drums. You play drums for a band and you're on the road and you get paid. But with songwriting, all of a sudden, the $2 Pistols would get songs in movies and stuff, and all of a sudden I'd get this check for like $2,000, and that's, to me, even still, but certainly at 30, was very, very real money.
It's still very real money, especially now.
So so that was kind of motivating too, I put a down payment on a house with money from songs that were in a horror movie called Jeepers Creepers. That movie, nobody thought that movie was going to be big. We got like a licensing fee for it, and then it opened on Labor Day, and for some reason set this record for a film that opened on Labor Day. So for years, it's not as much money now, certainly, but it came out in like 2000 or something. So for several years, when it went on cable and stuff, I would just get these great checks. It was weird. And just recently I got one in, not recently now, it's been 3 or 4 years, but I got one in that TV show Orange is the New Black.
Right.
That was really helpful for a while.
Sure.
I got one in that show Weeds. There was a show called United States of Terror. So anyway, there were like 10 that I had. And it's weird, I've been low on cash, and that check will show up, and all of a sudden we've got groceries for a couple months, So, but I mean, even that is very music industry based. Like, there hasn't, the records I released on my own, there hasn't been much from those records that's been in movies and TV shows. Records I put out on Yep Rock, I mean, they have someone working for them whose job it is to license those songs. So it's always, generally speaking, it's some song from those years. And I think I've written plenty of at least as good, if not better, songs since I have not been putting out records on big labels. But as we've said, it's music industry is its own beast.
Right. So like, and I think around that time when you were talking about forming the $2 Pistols and actually getting into your songwriting, at that point in time, I think there was like a small undercurrent of music that was kind of grouped in together, and there was a lot of interest being paid to this. Every couple of years, it seems like there's a lot of interest that ends up being paid to this area for various reasons. Like when I first met you when we were kids, it seemed like in Raleigh, what people knew about North Carolina was based on Corrosion of Conformity and the attention that they brought to the area because they traveled and stuff. And that was, I guess mid-'80s onward. And then I guess in the early 90s, the next thing that brought attention to the area was, I guess, Merge Records and Superchunk, whatever. And then a few years later, I, for a lack of a better term, it was, and I hate saying this because I wasn't really very familiar with a lot of the. It seemed to come from Satellites when they were around, when that place was around, and when I think it was a combination of the interest people had in Whiskey Town and Ryan Adams, and then along the way I heard about what you were doing, and then I knew about Kenny and Sixteen Drag, and I know there's a bunch of other people, but it seemed like all that woven together was that other wave of attention. And I would imagine that what you were doing was kind of swept up in that whole period too. Was that kind of beneficial to have sort of something for people like writers and stuff to sort of hang their hat on? Did it make any difference to you? Were you thrilled about that? Did it?
No. I mean, it was a mixed blessing because I started writing all those songs, and then that kind of happened.
Right.
And so, and I mean, I don't want this to be, you played with Ryan, and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, because obviously I'm well aware of what's, come out subsequently, but back then he was nice to me. I mean, I liked him, and I thought he was a good songwriter. But I didn't feel like what we were doing, was like that. And I certainly loved Kenny's. I always thought he was a great songwriter, and I liked the Backsliders as well. But I was trying to do something that was more based around a certain thing. I was really into Merle Haggard. I was really into George Jones. I was really into Ernest Tubb and all that stuff. And that's what I was trying to do. So sometimes we would get on those bills, and it didn't make as much sense as I think, like the kind of press at the time would have you believe, because we just weren't really, we didn't have rock and roll in what we were doing,
right.
Musically speaking, particularly. It was good in some sense because this network of people kind of formed. So you could play, like when our first record came out, we went to Texas. We'd never been to Texas. $2 Pistols had never been anywhere near there. But because of that network, we could play shows and like 50 people would be there,
Sure.
So in some ways it was helpful in much the way that, like, the kind of, punk fanzine scene would be in the early 80s, mid 80s, whatever.
Right.
But in other ways, it lumped you into something that I was looking at it long term, and I don't want this to sound like an insult, but I could see, even at that time, that for some of those people, it was a step to whatever was next. I didn't think that Ryan Adams would be writing country songs in even 10 years after that. And I think that I've been proven to be correct about that.
I really liked Kenny too. I agree. I'd say the only stuff, looking back, that was even associated with that world, if I had actually listened to what you were doing back then, I'm sure I would have put you in there. But Kenny, I thought Kenny was like, really good, and I still feel that way, for sure. But everything else, I just, you actually touch on all the stuff I hate about that sort of world, or that rock and roll kind of world. Like the song that from Not Tonight that resonates the most with me is that song Underground. That's so much how but the thing is like, I never really drank, I'm not against people that drink. We've had 6 beers in the refrigerator for the last year. One of these days we'll have a beer, I know it, maybe, but it's like the sense of just that whole, you just capture what I hate about rock and roll so much. And also the feeling when you've stuck around at the party a little too long, and you know that it just doesn't make sense for you to be a part of, like, you know, when you talking about some crappy new, you know, some new band or whatever, these bunch of drunk idiots talking about whatever they talk about.
Great they sound.
Some drunk person's gonna try to kiss some other person, and it's a bar, and it's like, I hated all that shit. And
it's still like that. It's still like, I mean, it was when I wrote that song 5 years ago. It was nothing had changed. It was still just
nothing's ever going to change. But now, if you know, for the last couple of years, it's so rare that I've gone to a show. You know, so when I go out there to see anything, I just feel like, you know, I feel the same way, even though I'm older. You know, but I have a lot more social anxiety.
Oh yeah.
Because you know, the old guy standing in the back. Well, that's, you know, I can't help it. But that song really crystallized what I hated about all that stuff.
I mean, I worked at the Cave for, good God, man, 7 or 8 years. I started working there when I was 28, and my mother died in 2005 when I was 36. So 8 years, and then I quit working there because I didn't want to work in a bar anymore. But I was dating someone, you know, 10 years later, and they started working at the Cave, and you know, it's a great bar, like I love it, but I hadn't been going to bars. I was a dad, and I was, you know, single parent and doing all that, and you know, we would play shows, but going into a bar to play is a lot different than being a part of its, you know, core scene.
Yeah.
And a friend of mine owned the bar who I love a lot, you know, and obviously I loved the person I was seeing who worked there at that time. But I was just amazed. It was like, it's different people, you know, like nobody I know from when I was here 10 years ago is still here. They've all moved on. There were a couple people, but for the most part, it was a totally different group of people, but all the same bullshit.
Yeah. It's just sad, you know?
Yeah, I mean, sure, there's that. But it was a lot more depressing, A, to be that much older and see it, and B, to be like dating someone who was embroiled in it. It was a fucking nightmare. And that's where that song, I just went on and wrote that song, you know, here it is. That's how I feel.
It's a great fuck you to that sort of thing. I loved it. Thanks. I mean, I like the whole record, but that song in particular, just the way it unfolds it's really nice.
Thanks.
Very bone simple statement. It's like, yeah, I hate this shit too. You know, there's just a certain point where it's just like, man, this is not very convincing.
I'm too old for this shit. Totally.
I'm just too old. Yeah, I'm just too old for this shit. You know,
pretty much.
So thanks for that song, man. So, you said initially that one of the first people that you gravitated toward when you were starting to write songs was Graham Parsons and stuff, and the Flying Burrito Brothers. Like the 2 records that Graham Parsons is on before Chris Hillman said, "You're not worth it."
Yeah.
All right. Were you into Gene Clark around the same time? Like, what do you like about Gene Clark?
Well, my kind of way to get to him was very convoluted because I got into the Byrds in high school. By the time I met you, when I was in Light in August, those guys were, you know, I wanted to play drums in a band, you know, and none of my punk friends were having me. So I met those guys, and we had some crossover. They liked like Susie and the Banshees, and probably Public Image Limited, who I was really into. Go ahead.
Let me jump in.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Public Image Limited record?
It's probably Metal Box.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I love the first one, Metal Box, and Flowers Romance. God. Oh my God, I love those records. We saw Public Image Limited. Was that last year we saw Pill? 2 years ago?
It had to have been
2 years ago. We went to DC to see them, and I've seen them like 6 times, never with Keith Levine, never with Jaw Wobble.
Yeah.
But it was the best time I ever saw them of all the times in the 80s, because it was not, again, they weren't geared towards like being on MTV. There was none of that. It was just like it was almost like a trancey kind of vibe. But so he still got it. He kind of seems like more of an idiot now than he ever has, but his voice sounded great. The band was great, but probably Metal Box, man. It's funny. When my mother died in 2005, I was not in a public image limited phase.
Right.
I was at all. And I was driving back from Raleigh, which is Wake County, which is where she had lived. And my sister and I were trying to deal with her house, which is very hard to do when someone dies. Like, dealing with their stuff it's a fucking nightmare. And
yeah, I had that experience with my dad. That wasn't a lot of fun.
No, it's terrible, and it takes forever. And I was on my way back, and I was listening to WXYC, I think, and the DJ played Death Disco, which John Lydon wrote about his mother dying.
Right.
And it was so, I had to pull the car over. It was so powerful. It was so moving. And then that's when I was like, yeah, okay, I remember what this music meant to me. And now here it is, and I'm feeling it in a new way.
Sure.
So I'll always love those first 3 albums. I guess there's a live one in there, but
yeah.
But they were into that stuff. But those guys turned me on to some things that I was not listening to that much. And one of those bands was the Byrds, and so I got into the Byrds. But at that age, and without liner notes and stuff, I didn't really understand that there was this guy who wrote most of the songs that weren't covers.
On the first record, on Mr. Tambourine Man, and then wrote the best songs on Turn, Turn, Turn. So when they weren't playing a traditional song that Roger McGuinn rearranged with his great guitar playing, and then when they weren't doing a Dylan cover, all the other songs were Gene Clark songs. But yeah, I
didn't realize that at that age. And so it wasn't, Gene Clark, that didn't come into my orbit until I was in my early 20s. I met a guy, I was working at the record store in Durham, Poindexter Records, and I was playing a Byrds record store, and I was playing a Byrds record, and a guy came in and said, "Oh, I love Gene Clark." And I said, know the name, and he kind of explained to me who Gene Clark was, and he said he's got these solo records, and they're great, and they're all great, and they're really good, and
nobody cares, nobody knows about them.
Nobody gives a shit. And so he went home and made a tape of me. I guess he had these records. He was way older than me. On one side was the Dillard and Clark record with "Why Not Your Baby,"
the Fantastic Expedition of Dillard and Clark, the best one.
And yes, and the other side was Gene Clark with the Gosden brothers, and I could not believe. I was like, "Oh my God! Like what is this? This is like the greatest music I've ever heard in my life. Like, why are people not screaming this man's name from the rooftop?"
To this very day, it's really weird.
Still like that, and so after that, I was a fan, and got things when I could. I managed to get a copy of Roadmaster somewhere in there, but there were records that it took me years to find, and I would just always buy them when I saw them. He's appealing to me for a lot of the same reasons that the people we've been talking about are appealing. I mean, clearly not cut out for the bullshit music industry. Clearly not designed. I don't know if you've seen any of those videos of him when he was in McGuinn, Clark, and Hillman, but he looks like about the least comfortable human being.
He looks terrified.
Yeah.
He looks terrified, and you can tell. And have you read any of the books? There's one book about his life, Mr. Tambourine Man.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and it's his personal problems make a nice VH1 horror kind of story, but it's really about the music. It's like he just had it. He
totally had it, and those chord progressions are so strange. It doesn't really you hear the country influence and the folk, and even like there's blues and sometimes, and But he took that and made it his own. You can kind of almost, he's one of those guys, as soon as you hear those first couple chords, you're like, this must be Gene Clark. You know, he just does those weird chord changes. And gosh, I don't know. I just adore him. And it's so tragic. I guess one of his sons just died.
Yeah, Kelly.
Right. And so I just, you know, I have friends who saw him play with those bands he was touring around with in the 80s that had like Blondie Chaplin and Rick
Danko. Rick Danko was in one of them.
Yeah.
Rick Roberts from the Burrito Brothers and Firefall was
his first two solo records are great. They're great records, and he's an interesting guy. Anyway, it's hard to imagine now. Can you imagine if Gene Clark and Rick Danko, you know, they'd be selling out theaters now, but at the time, you know, they were playing half full places that held like 300 or 400 people. It's remarkable.
Yeah, the 80s. Well, you know, for those guys, I imagine like I wasn't there listening to what they were doing, obviously, but being those kind of guys in the 80s when everything just really changed and trying to carve out any kind of interest from people, you know, it must have been really difficult. But Gene was like really good up until the end. Do you know about that record, the Gypsy? I don't want to say, not the record he did with
Carl Olson.
Yeah, I like
that's
some
good too. That's got some great songs.
That song, "Why Did You Leave Me Today?" That's an amazing song.
Yep.
And I like all his songs sound like, I feel like I've heard this somewhere, but I haven't. Yeah. Like there's this idea of familiarity stripped to the bone. Yeah. Kind of like you know. But the record, I think, is called the Gypsy Angel Demos.
Yeah.
That's a good record. It sounds like every song was recorded at the bottom of a 50-foot well, and they're all great songs. And like he still had it, you know.
Still had it. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, it is tragic. But are you a fan of I like No Other, but I don't think No Other is really my favorite record, even though that's like.
I mean, I'm with you. I love it for what it is, but not really what I want from Gene Clark. It's a little more schizophrenic, to use a very overused term that could never be used. Sure. It just seems, and but that's, you know, that's what I love about him is like, well, he's trying to do something different. You know, he's just following his way, and I like it too. It's not. I played a Gene Clark Graham Parsons tribute show last December in Asheville, and
how'd that go?
It was great. It was a lot of fun. Graham Parsons' sister showed up, which was pretty wild. But the Gene songs that they had me do were both from No Other.
Which one?
Life's Greatest Fool. I did that one, which is a great song.
Sure.
And I did the song No Other, which I had never really paid attention to those lyrics until I had to sing it. And it's this, you know, it's weird, kind of mystical. It's like Gene goes, you know, Zen or something. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, he was very poetic, you know. Well, were you ever a fan of Tom Petty at all?
You know, I do have a lot of respect for him. And I like some of his songs. I think I tend to like the people that he took from more than him, like the Byrds and Dwight Twilley.
Dwight Twilley.
Those are I prefer the music that I think, and I'm sure people would be angry at me for saying this, but that I think very clearly influenced what he did. But I have a lot of respect for him. I think he wrote some wonderful songs. Have you ever seen that footage of him during Roger McGuinn made that record Back from Rio for Arista Records, which
I mean, I remember that, you know, like, yeah.
There's footage of Tom Petty, basically. I don't know how you find it, but he's in this room with the producers for that record, and they've all got mullets, and Roger McGuinn's sitting there being Roger McGuinn. He's kind of smiling, and they're trying to get him to play this song, and it's fucking awful. And Tom Petty's like, this is an American legend, and you're handing him this piece of shit, probably because you guys have publishing on it or something. What the fuck are you doing? And it's so great. It's so magical because he's just like,
defending Roger McGuinn, who just wants to have somebody pay attention to him at this point.
And is clearly happy that he's being allowed to make this contemporary record with the Elvis Costello songs or whatever is on it. And they're feeding it song, and it's just crap. And Tom Petty's like, you guys are fucking losers, man. You know, like this is an American legend, a legend of American music. And you're trying to get him to do this piece of crap song, and these guys, you know, are not used to being spoken to that way.
Sure. I'm sure.
Wonderful moment. It's a wonderful moment, and I've kind of, you know, it adds to my respect for him. He's not somebody, I don't pull out his records. I'm not even sure I own any anymore, but I certainly.
I have one, and that's the Wildflowers record.
Okay.
That somebody turned me on to a while ago, which I like better than his other stuff. But the reason I bring him up is because I just think he kind of took a lot from Gene Clark.
Yeah.
But I don't think anybody's ever, I mean, not just Gene Clark, but obviously Roger McGuinn and the Byrds and other stuff that came out of the 60s. He pays a lot of lip service for toward all those people. So I always thought it was nice that he like covered Gene Clark songs, but sort of that no bullshit kind of songwriting where like you can tell they just, well, in Gene Clark's case, he just like, it seems like he's almost stripping away everything and just leaving this bare essential song with nothing adorning it that has that sort of feel of being familiar but is not ripping off anything. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes perfect sense. And one of my favorite Gene Clark records to listen to is that one that I think is demos for I think it's demos for one of those records from the 70s. He does like a version of With Tomorrow on it. I can't remember what the album's called.
I know what it's called. I think it's it was self-titled, but I think it's called White Light.
Right. So there's a record, a CD that I have somewhere.
Yeah.
That's, I guess, demos for that, and it's kind of even more stripped down than that record. And man, like, I would have been perfectly happy if his records were just kind of him, you know. I like the production on a lot of them, and even on like Roadmaster and the Gosling Brothers one where there's more production. They're still great, but as you say, man, those songs, like in their barest form, they're perfect as is. You know, it's kind of remarkable.
Yeah, I just think it's really weird that he just doesn't get, to this day. There's been a little bit of attention, but and like he's always pitted against, you know, his contemporaries, and that usually is basically Graham Parsons. And I don't know. I feel about Graham Parsons how you feel about Tom Petty.
Right.
You know? But I just think, well, if Gene Clark knew Keith Richards and died in a very dramatic fashion and had his body burned in the desert, maybe people would probably be a little bit kinder to Gene Clark or be interested in checking him out.
I think that's true. If he died in a romantic, you know, young way, instead of being a 40-something guy missing his teeth, who had gone out and done all these tours that were kind of frowned upon. If none of that had happened, then we'd probably be, you know, he would be respected in a different way. It's sad but true, you know.
People love that stuff. Well, thank you again for letting me talk to you.
My pleasure.
So I guess at some point eventually we're going to hear some new music.
That's the idea. So I've got the songs, and I've recorded 4 or 5 of them so far. Like I say, acoustic guitars, vocals to a click track, and their drums have been added to 1 or 2. and hopefully from there it will move forward and we'll have a new body of songs. And I don't know what's going to happen with the stuff we were working on. Hopefully that will come out at some point, but I don't know about you, but I don't want to make any kind of guess as to when this is all going to be over, or even if it's going to be over. I think a lot of things depend upon the election and who becomes president. Because if it's the person we have now, I think it's just going to go on for fucking, sadly.
Well, we didn't talk a lot about any of that stuff, and that's kind of good.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree.
Well, is there? I probably should have done this with some of the other people that I've talked to so far. But is there anything people are interested in getting in touch with you or want to check out some of your musical output for the people that might be watching this that aren't very familiar? This is the promote myself.
Yeah. I should do that. I would say go to the Bandcamp, John Howie Jr., and you can find Not Tonight there, and you can find the Kinks single the Kinks cover that we did, and if you look up also John Howie Jr. and the Rosewood Bluff on Bandcamp, I think there's 2 records on that page. They're different ones, but Not Tonight, is its own beast. $2 Pistols, you can look that up. All those records are on Spotify, I think, now. Your $2 Pistols. And John Howie Jr. is on Spotify. Not Tonight's on Spotify. So that stuff's pretty easy to find. And yeah, please check it out, for sure.
Well, John, it was a pleasure.
My pleasure.
I really had a nice time.